The gorse cat's claws scraped stone 3 feet from Julian Cross's face, and he did not move. 12 students pressed against the observation rail behind him, and not one of them breathed. The simulation chamber's holographic forest had gone still, every leaf frozen mid-shiver, waiting on the thing that fed on fear to decide what came next. Julian's wrist throbbed under its brace. He ignored it. Which variety? He'd asked, 3 days ago, in a classroom that had not expected the question. Now the Coalition's entire predator evasion curriculum hung on whether a human with a sprained wrist could answer it himself. The gorse cat's 4 eyes narrowed to slits. It was not a real animal. It was a program built from the fierce signatures of 600 cadets, adaptive, hungry, and until 60 seconds ago, undefeated. Julian spread his arms, made himself tall, made himself loud. "You're just a bad dream," he said. The gorse cat flickered. Its shoulders, built from someone else's nightmare, stuttered like a bad signal. It froze mid-snarl, jaw open, nothing behind its eyes anymore. Julian turned to the students, who still hadn't moved. "You don't need to be faster than it," he said. "Just harder to read." Somewhere behind the rail, a Lagari student named Vadel made a small, translucent sound that might have been a sob or might have been relief. Dr. Curix, watching from the control booth with his mandibles clicking, did not have a word for what he'd just seen. 3 days ago, he would have called it reckless. Now he wasn't sure what to call it at all. "I should tell you how we got here. It started with a slide deck, a boardroom, and a question nobody on this ship was ready to answer. 6 days earlier, the simulation chamber smelled like ozone and cold recycled air, the kind of smell that meant the projectors had been running too long. Fluorescent strips buzzed overhead. Dr. Curix stood at the front of the room, exoskeletal limbs clicking softly with each step, and behind him, slide 32 loaded onto the wall. A diagram of a four-legged predator captioned Standard Evasion Protocol, Rev 14. Nobody was looking at it. Threx, deep-shelled and unbothered, had his eyes half shut. Ozette's scales had gone a dull, worried grey. Vadel sat folded into himself near the back, the way he always did when the lights buzzed too loud. Julian Cross leaned back in his chair at the far end of the row, boots up on the seat in front of him, an immobilization brace wrapped around his left wrist. If anyone had asked, and a few had, he'd say it was from a hydroponics incident involving a broken ladder, a startled maintenance robot, and a string of decisions he stood by completely. "Slide 32, Curix said, outlines the correct response to pursuit class predators. Step 1, do not run in a straight line." Julian raised his good hand. "Which kind?" Curix's pupils, small already, narrowed further. His posture, measurable in microns by the ship's monitoring systems, shifted exactly 4 millimeters to the left. "There is one protocol, Mr. Cross. It applies universally." "See, that's the thing." Julian sat up. The chair creaked. "Back home, we've got maybe 40 things that'll eat you, and they don't read the same textbook. A crocodile wants you to run. A cougar wants you to freeze. A moose just wants you gone, and it will absolutely end your whole week to make that happen." Threx opened one eye. "So which variety," Julian said again, "are we training for?" The room went quiet in a way it hadn't been quiet before. Curix's mandibles made a faint clicking sound, the kind that meant his internal cooling system had kicked on a notch. "The protocol is universal," he repeated, slower this time, like repeating it louder would make it true. "There is no variety. There is the correct response." "There's 4, Julian said. "Ambush, pursuit, defensive, territorial. My little cousin could tell you that by age 6. She'd also tell you the response is different for all 4, and if you get it backward, you're the one who gets eaten." A student near the middle, Ozette, scales flickering nervous gold, made a small sound. "You are taught this, as children." "Yeah," Julian shrugged with his good shoulder. "Trial by life. Nobody hands you a slide deck. You just figure it out or you don't." Curix's fan cooling system whined audibly now, a thin mechanical note under his voice. "That is," he said, "an extraordinarily inefficient education model. Probably, Julian agreed. Works, though. He held up his braced wrist, turned it slightly so the faded yellow stripe on the fabric caught the fluorescent light. This, for the record, is not from a predator. This is from a ladder and my own poor judgment. I want that on the record before the rumors start. That got a laugh, thin and nervous, from somewhere near the back. Vaddel's rumor, Julian happened to know, currently involved a crashing boarding party and a heroic last stand. The truth was significantly less impressive and significantly more his own fault. Curix did not laugh. Curix pulled up slide 33, which was identical to slide 32 except for a different silhouette, and said, in the exact same flat cadence, the protocol remains universal regardless of species variance. Julian looked at the slide, looked at Curix. Something in his expression settled into the particular calm of a man who has just realized he is about to become someone's problem. Okay, he said, let's test that. He didn't get the chance that day. The bell, a soft three-tone chime that meant the shift was ending, cut the session short, and the students filed out into the corridor in twos and threes, Vaddel trailing behind with his shoulders still hunched from the earlier laugh. Julian caught up to him near the mess hall doors. Hey, you're not actually shell-shocked from a crashing boarding party, right? Vaddel's translucent skin went a faint, mortified blue. I did not say that. I said I was involved in an incident. An incident involving a supply crate and a very startled cleaning drone, Julian said. I was there. It's fine. Everybody's got one. Yours involved a ladder. Mine involved a ladder, a drone, and roughly 4 seconds of very poor life choices. Julian held up the brace again, like evidence in a trial nobody was running. It's not glamorous, but it's mine. They pushed through the mess hall doors together, into the low hum of 50 conversations, and the smell of something that was supposed to be approximating stew. Threx was already at a table, methodically working through a tray with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything. You are going to keep asking him that, Threx said, without looking up. The variety question. Damn right I am. He will not answer it. He does not have an answer. The council wrote one protocol and gave it to him to teach, and if he admits it does not work for every species in this room, he has to admit the entire curriculum needs rewriting. Julian pulled out a chair and sat, favoring his bad wrist out of habit. So he'll rewrite it. Threx's deep-set eyes flicked up, unreadable behind his scarf-wrapped joints. You misunderstand Zentry administration. Rewriting is not a small thing. It requires committee approval, cross-species review, 6 to 9 months of deliberation. Curix would rather die at his post than admit a single lesson plan requires deviation. Cool, Julian said, and picked up his fork. Guess we'll find out how strong that conviction is. Vaddel, sliding into the seat across from him, looked between the two of them with the particular anxiety of someone who could already see where this was headed and did not like the view. What are you planning? Nothing yet. Julian took a bite, chewed, considered. But there's a predator simulation on this ship, rated for advanced tactical training, and I happen to know it's sitting unused 3 decks down. Ozette, arriving late with her tray and immediately picking up on the tension the way she picked up on everything, sat down hard. That simulator is rated for combat instructors, not for open enrollment. Didn't say I was going to enroll. Julian. I said I was going to ask. Threx made a sound that might, in a revelin throat, have been something close to a laugh. You are going to get us all reassigned to sanitation duty. Maybe, Julian grinned, and for just a second the exhaustion of 6 weeks aboard a training vessel built for a curriculum that had never once accounted for humans lifted off his shoulders. But I'd like to see him explain a hippopotamus first. You'll want to hear what he said when Julian used the word hippopotamus. Stay close. Curix's office was small, spotless, and smelled faintly of the coolant gel he used to keep his joints from clicking. Julian knocked on the frame rather than the door, which didn't have a door in the traditional sense, just a membrane that hissed open at proximity. Mr. Cross, Curix didn't look up from his terminal. I assume this concerns yesterday's slide. It concerns slide 32, yeah. Julian leaned against the frame. I want an hour in the advanced simulator, off the books. No grading, no report, just me and whoever wants to watch. That simulator is rated for combat instructors. I've field-dressed a bear bite with dental floss and a protein bar wrapper. I think I can handle a holographic wolf. Curix's fan finally clicked on, low and even. The answer is no. Why? Because the protocol is universal, and demonstrating otherwise serves no pedagogical purpose. It serves the purpose of not getting your Lagari kid killed the first time he meets something that doesn't run in a straight line. Julian's voice stayed easy, but something under it had gone flat and serious. Vadal freezes. That's his whole species thing, right? Freeze first, panic later. Your protocol tells him to run. You're teaching him the wrong instinct for his own body. For the first time, Curix's pupils didn't narrow. They widened just slightly and stayed that way for a beat too long. The protocol, he said again, but slower now, less certain, is universal. Say it a third time, maybe it'll be true. Julian pushed off the doorframe. I'm not asking for the simulator anymore. I'm telling you I'm doing this in the gym with volunteers, no equipment, completely harmless. You can write me up after. He didn't wait for an answer. Word moved fast on a ship with 600 board cadets. By the time Julian reached the gym, 4 students were already waiting, which was 3 more than he'd actually invited. Vadal stood nearest the door, translucent skin gone a pale, determined blue. Threx had brought a chair and set it against the wall like he intended to observe from a safe distance and change his mind about that later. Ozette hovered near the equipment rack, scales flickering gold and nervous. And a Tulkari student Julian didn't recognize, all 4 eyes wide with the specific hunger of someone who'd rather watch a disaster than avoid one, had claimed a spot on the mats. Okay, Julian clapped his hands, favoring his bad wrist as he did. Nobody's actually getting chased. This is theory, then a walk-through slow. You said harmless, Threx said from his chair, and yet you are limping. That's an old injury, unrelated. Focus. Julian pointed at Vadal. You freeze. That's not weakness, that's a strategy. Plenty of things in nature go still and let a predator lose interest. Problem is, on Earth, freezing only works against ambush types. Against a pursuit predator, freezing gets you eaten. So what do I do? Vadal's voice came out smaller than he probably meant it to. Depends what's chasing you. That's the whole point. Julian crouched, checked his stance was even, ignored the twinge in his wrist. Bear, make noise, make yourself big, don't run. Cougar, same, don't turn your back. Moose, get something solid between you and it, because a moose does not care how big you make yourself, it will simply end you. Ozette made a small, strangled sound. This creature, the moose, it hunts you. No, that's the beautiful part. It's not even a predator. It just doesn't like you and its 1,200 pounds of pure bad mood. Julian straightened up. Point is, one rule doesn't cover it. You've got to read the thing in front of you. He walked Vadal through it slow, the way you'd teach a kid to ride a bike. Hands loose, voice steady. Freeze, assess, decide. Threx, despite the chair, was on his feet within 2 minutes, arguing the biomechanics of a zigzag retreat with an intensity that suggested he'd stopped pretending to be a skeptical bystander. Ozette wouldn't move from the equipment rack, but she was taking notes, actual notes, on a data slate she'd pulled from somewhere. It was, by any measure, going well. Then the membrane at the door hissed, and Curix walked in. The room didn't exactly freeze, that would have been too on the nose, but every student in it went very still, which was, Julian noted, technically the wrong response for 4 different reasons depending on species. Mr. Cross, Curix's voice had the particular flatness of someone containing something. I told you the answer was no. You told me the simulator was no. This is a gym. This is insubordination. This is 4 students who wanted to learn something useful on a Tuesday. Julian didn't move from where he stood, didn't raise his hands, didn't do anything that would read as a threat. "You're welcome to watch. Might learn something too." Curix's mandibles made the fan overheating click, sharp and fast, 3 times in a row. He didn't leave. Julian turned back to the group. "Round 2. This time we're doing groups. Predators don't just chase one target, they read the herd, they look for the one who panics first, breaks off, makes a mistake." He waved the 4 of them into a loose cluster. "Threx, you're the calm one, hold your ground. Vadil, Ozette, you two are going to want to bolt the second I say go. Don't. That's the whole exercise." "What if I bolt anyway?" Vadil said. "Then you learn what it feels like to be the one who bolts. That's data too. Fear's not a failure, it's input." He said go. What followed was less a coordinated demonstration and more 4 people of wildly different anatomies attempting to move as one unit and mostly failing. Ozette overcorrecting into Threx's shoulder, Vadil going rigid at exactly the wrong moment, the Tulkari student narrating the whole thing from the mats like a sports broadcast. It was chaotic. It was loud. Nobody got hurt, though Threx would later claim a bruise that Julian suspected was mostly principal. And Curix watched every second of it, mandibles clicking, cooling fan running hot enough that 2 students glanced over more than once, waiting for him to say something. He didn't, not yet. The question came after, when the group had mostly dispersed, and it was just Julian, catching his breath against the equipment rack, and Curix, standing exactly where he'd stood the whole time. "What if?" Curix said, and there was something almost careful in how he said it, like he was testing weight on ice. "The predator is human." Julian looked at him for a second. "Then you're out of luck." "Explain." "Humans don't have one tell. We don't have a universal protocol either. That's the whole problem you've got with us. Some of us bluff, some of us fight, some of us just talk really fast and hope for the best. If a human decides you're prey, there's no slide deck that covers every version of that." Julian's voice had lost its usual ease, just for a moment. "That's not a flaw in the species. That's just what happens when the predator and the prey are the same animal." Curix said nothing to that. His pupils had gone very small, very focused. The way they did, Julian had noticed, whenever something didn't fit his framework and he was trying to force it to. "I have," Curix said finally, "never heard curriculum described that way." "Most people don't teach it, they live it." Julian shrugged, wincing slightly as the motion pulled at his wrist. "That's the whole reason I'm not big on slide decks, Doc. They flatten stuff that isn't flat." By the next ship day, the gym sessions had a name. Nobody could agree who'd coined it, though Threx denied it with more energy than the denial warranted, and a waiting list. Word had reached the mess hall, and Julian found himself cornered at breakfast by a Farnerian he didn't recognize, asking, with real urgency, whether it was true that some Earth predators could smell fear. "Sharks, sort of," Julian said, around a mouthful of something approximating eggs. "Blood, mostly. Fear's more of a body language thing for most of them." "Why?" "Because Ozette told everyone you can smell a predator's intention before it moves." "That's not exactly what I said, but close enough, sure." Threx, seated across from him, didn't look up from his tray. "You have started a religion." "I've started a rumor mill. There's a difference." Julian glanced toward the door, where a knot of students had gathered, watching him the way you'd watch a minor celebrity, and felt something between pride and alarm settle in his chest. This was supposed to be 4 people and a gym. Word moves fast when the alternative is Curix's slide deck. Threx finally looked up. "You should know he has not filed a report on the gym sessions yet." "Is that good?" "I do not know. He has also not stopped attending them." Julian set down his fork. Across the mess hall, at the far end of a table crowded with data slates, Curix sat alone, his terminal open in front of him, scrolling. Julian would find out later. Not then, through Earth's wildlife database, one entry at a time, his cooling fan running at a low, steady hum that hadn't quite switched off since the demonstration 2 days prior. He'd gotten as far as the entry on hippopotamus amphibious. He had not yet recovered from it. The message came through official channels 3 days after that, stamped with the seal of the Coalition Education Council, and it landed on Julian's terminal at the exact moment he was trying to explain to Vadel why bluff only worked if you actually committed to it. Curix had requested a formal observation, not of Julian, of the gym sessions. The council would be sending someone to watch the next one. The observer arrived 4 hours early, which nobody expected, and stood in the gym doorway with a data slate already recording before Julian had finished stretching out his bad wrist. "Don't mind me," the observer said. She was Zentry like Curix, but younger, her exoskeleton a lighter shade, her posture nowhere near as rigid. "Council sent me to watch. I'm not here to interrupt." "You're interrupting a little," Julian said, but he was smiling when he said it. Curix stood near the back wall, arms folded, cooling fan silent for once. He hadn't said a word since walking in, which Julian had learned by now meant something was working itself loose behind those narrow pupils. "Same drill as always," Julian told the room, 6 students now, word having spread further than he'd planned. "Vadel, Ozette, you two lead the herd exercise. Threx, your anchor. New guy," he nodded at the Tulkari, whose name Julian had finally learned was Ket. "You're going to call it out loud like commentary. Teaching moment for everyone, including our observer." Ket's 4 eyes lit up. "I have been practicing this." "God help us." The exercise ran clean, cleaner than it had any right to. 6 bodies of 6 different anatomies moving with something that almost looked like coordination. Ozette bolted once, caught herself, rejoined the formation, a full 3 seconds faster than she had 2 sessions ago. Vadel didn't freeze at all. The observer's stylus moved fast across her slate, and twice she glanced at Curix like she was waiting for him to object. He didn't. Afterward, while the students filed out, the observer approached Julian directly. Dr. Curix's report characterized this as unauthorized supplemental instruction. He did not mention it was working. Would you have believed him if he said it was? No, she almost smiled. But I'd have come anyway. The councils had 17 species fail standard evasion protocol certification this cycle. 17. Someone was going to ask why eventually. Julian glanced past her at Curix, still standing against the wall, still saying nothing. Ask him. He's been asking himself the same thing for a week. That night, ship night, the lights dimmed to a soft amber that was supposed to mimic circadian rhythm across 40 different species, and mostly failed. Julian sat alone in the mess hall, working through the last of a protein ration, when Curix sat down across from him without asking. Julian looked up, surprised enough that he set down his fork. I reviewed the Earth database, Curix said. No preamble, no clicking mandibles, no cooling fan running hot, just flat and quiet. 4,000 recorded predator species, no 2 evasion strategies identical. I initially assumed this was evidence of an unfinished curriculum, a species still developing consensus. And now I believe it is the opposite. I believe your species developed no consensus because consensus would have killed you. Curix's pupils, usually pinpoints, had gone wide and steady. I do not know how to write a protocol for a species with no protocol. I have never encountered this before. Julian didn't say anything for a moment. It wasn't often he saw Curix without an answer. You don't write it, Julian said finally. You teach the thinking, not the steps. You teach kids to read what's in front of them, not to run a script. That is not how coalition curriculum functions. No, Julian agreed, but it's how we're still here. Curix's mandibles clicked once softly, not the overheating stutter Julian had come to expect, something closer to a sigh, if an exoskeleton could sigh. I submitted the observer's report to the full council this afternoon, along with a formal request for curriculum review. Julian went still. You did that. I did not want to. I want that understood. Curix stood, smoothing a hand down his forearm plates in a gesture Julian hadn't seen before, something almost nervous. But I have spent 11 years teaching cadets a protocol that fails 17 species a cycle, and I have just watched a Lagari stop freezing after 4 sessions with no protocol at all. I am many things, Mr. Cross. I am not willing to be a fool about it." He left before Julian could answer, mandibles clicking softly behind him, and Julian sat alone in the amber half-light for a long moment, turning the brace on his wrist absently between 2 fingers. The council's answer came faster than anyone expected, 3 days, when Threx swore these things usually took months, and it came with conditions nobody had asked for. "They want a live demonstration," Keurig said the next morning, standing in the gym doorway like he hadn't slept. "Full council session. Advanced simulator, full Predator suite, no scripting." "For who?" "For you." Keurig's voice was careful, precise, the way it got when he was containing something. "The council wishes to see whether a single unarmed instructor, adapting in real time with no fixed protocol, can outperform 6 cadets running standard evasion under controlled conditions. If you succeed, curriculum review is approved. If you fail. If I fail, it's back to slide 32 forever." "Essentially." Julian looked past him, toward the gym floor, where Vadel and Ozette were already running through a warm-up they'd started doing on their own, unprompted, the movements looser than they'd been 2 weeks ago. Threx stood near the equipment rack, arms crossed, watching Julian with an expression that was somehow both skeptical and expectant at once. "When?" Julian said. "Tomorrow," Julian repeated. He rubbed at his wrist, where the brace had started to feel less like an injury and more like a habit. "That's not a lot of runway." "It is what the council granted." Curix hesitated, an unfamiliar gesture on him. "I attempted to request more time. I was told the Gorscat module has already logged a 91% failure rate against certified cadets this cycle. The council wants to see if the failure is the module or the protocol. And if it's neither, if it's just that nobody's ever walked in there without a script." Curix didn't answer that. He didn't need to. Word reached the mess hall before lunch, the way it always did now, faster than any official channel. By the time Julian sat down with his tray, Ket had already started narrating an imagined version of tomorrow's demonstration to a table of wide-eyed underclassmen, none of it accurate, all of it enthusiastic. "You're not eating," Threx said, sliding into the seat across from him. "I'm thinking. About the wrist." Julian looked up. Threx wasn't looking at him. He never looked at anyone directly when he said something that mattered. Julian had noticed, some Revelin habit about not staring down vulnerability. "It's fine. It's healed enough." "You have not told anyone what actually happened to it." "I told everyone." Ladder drone, poor judgment. "You told everyone a story," Threx said, "that changes slightly every time. Vadel thinks it was 2 months ago. Ozette thinks it was 6 weeks. I do not think it was a ladder at all." Julian didn't answer right away. Outside the mess hall window, the amber ship lights had shifted to the harsher daylight cycle, and somewhere 3 decks down, the advanced simulator was already being prepped, its Gorscat module logging test data nobody could see yet. "Doesn't matter where it came from," Julian said finally. "Matters what I do with it tomorrow." Threx's eyes, deep-set and unreadable, held on him a moment longer than the conversation strictly required. "That is not an answer either." "No," Julian agreed. "It isn't." He picked his fork back up and didn't say anything else, and Threx, for once, let the silence stand instead of pushing it. The demonstration was scheduled for 900, and by 8:50, the observation gallery above the advanced simulator was full, council delegates in a tight formal row, Curix standing apart from them near the control panel, and behind the lower rail, 6 students who had no official reason to be there and hadn't been told to leave. Julian stood at the chamber floor's edge, wrist brace still on, boots planted. "Standard rules," the lead council delegate said, her voice carried down through the chamber speakers. "Gorscat module, adaptive difficulty, no scripted response permitted. You may stop at any time." "Don't plan to." "Begin." The forest bloomed around him, holographic canopy folding down out of nothing, and somewhere in the green, the Gorse Cat's fear signature engine started reading him, his pulse, his breath, the micro-tremor in his bad wrist, and building itself a shape out of whatever it found. Julian reached down and adjusted the brace, tightened it one notch, an old habit that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with the fact that his hands needed something to do. The chamber held its breath around him, holographic leaves frozen mid-fall, and for 3 full seconds, nothing moved at all. Then the Gorse Cat came out of the trees, and it was already wrong. Bigger than the training profile. Faster. It had built itself, Julian realized in the half-second before it closed the distance. Out of every fear it had read off 6 weeks of failed cadets stacked on top of his own. He didn't run. He told Vadel not to, and he wasn't about to be the one who broke his own rule in front of the whole council. He made himself big. He made himself loud. He stomped once hard and barked a sound with no dignity in it whatsoever, the same sound he'd have made at a black bear rooting through a campsite a lifetime ago, and the Gorse Cat's shoulders, built from someone else's nightmare, stuttered. It didn't freeze, not yet. It circled, reading him again, adjusting. "It's recalibrating," Curix said, quiet up in the gallery, more to himself than anyone. "It has never had to do that twice." Julian planted his feet, held his ground, and thought, not about the Gorse Cat, not about the council, but about a night 11 years ago that had nothing to do with any of this and everything to do with why his left wrist would never sit quite right again. He'd been 22, alone on a research trail he had no business being on that late, and the thing that came out of the tree line hadn't been holographic. It hadn't cared about protocol. It had been real and hungry and faster than he was, and the only reason Julian Cross was standing in a coalition simulation chamber a decade later instead of being a statistic in a wildlife report was that he had done, in blind panic, the exact same thing he was doing now on purpose. He'd made himself big. He'd screamed something wordless. He'd stood his ground when every cell in his body told him to run, because his little cousin's voice was somehow in his head, telling him freezing was for ambush predators, and this wasn't one. It had worked. Barely. The wrist had been the cost, a fall backward over a root, not a claw, not a bite, nothing as dramatic as the rumors that eventually replaced the true story, because the true story was less about the ladder and more about the fact that Julian had never quite been able to say out loud how close it had actually been. He told everyone it was a hydroponics incident because the truth sounded like luck, and luck wasn't something he trusted himself to teach. The Gorse Cat lunged. Julian spread his arms wide, made himself as tall as his frame allowed, and said the only thing that had ever worked, the only line that mattered, plain and flat and completely unafraid. "You're just a bad dream." The Gorse Cat's shoulders stuttered again, harder this time, its jaw catching mid-snarl, its 4 eyes narrowing to the same slits Julian had seen from the observation rail in a memory that hadn't happened yet when this story started, but had, in every sense that mattered, already happened first. It froze. Nothing behind its eyes, just code, waiting on an input it no longer had. The chamber went silent. Up in the gallery, one of the council delegates set down her stylus without seeming to notice she'd done it. Curix didn't move at all. Julian turned toward the students at the rail, who still hadn't moved either, and said the line he'd say to all of them 1,000 more times over whatever years he had left on this ship. "You don't need to be faster than it," he said, "just harder to read." Nobody clapped. It wasn't that kind of room. But the lead delegate rose from her seat, exoskeleton catching the chamber light, and said 4 words that would end up in the official council record for the next decade of curriculum reviews. Approved, effective immediately. Curix's mandibles clicked, once softly, and this time Julian was close enough to see it wasn't the overheating stutter of frustration. It was closer to a breath being let out after a very long time holding it. "You didn't run," Curix said, when the delegates had filed out and the gallery had mostly emptied. The module escalated past every recorded threshold. You did not run. Wasn't going to teach a room full of kids one thing and do another myself. Curix studied him a moment, exoskeleton catching the last of the chamber light. I looked up Hippopotamus amphibius again last night. It kills more people on its continent than any large predator. It is not fast in appearance. It is very fast in truth. He paused. I begin to understand the reference. Took you long enough, Doc. 11 years of curriculum, Curix said, and I learned more from 6 weeks of watching you fail to follow it. The Adaptive Threat Response elective launched 3 weeks later, and it filled its enrollment cap within a single ship day, the first course in Coalition Education Council history to do so. Vadel taught the Freeze Assessment Unit himself by the second term, voice steadier than Julian had ever heard it. Threx ran the biomechanics seminar with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything minus, thankfully, the chair and safe distance approach. Ozette stopped flinching at loud noises sometime around week 5, though nobody made a thing of it, because that was exactly the point. Curix requested a formal leave from standard protocol instruction and spent it instead, cataloging every predator response variant across every coalition member species he could reach, species by species, building something that looked less like a slide deck and more like a living document that changed every time someone proved it wrong. Julian's medical log, once thick with entries from a decade of small accidents and one very large one he'd never officially reported, thinned out to something close to normal. His wrist healed clean, no lingering ache, no reason left to favor it. He kept wearing the brace for another 2 weeks anyway. Out of habit, he told people when they asked. That was mostly true. He took it off on a quiet evening near the observation platform, 3 decks up from the gym, where the viewport looked out on nothing but stars that had never once cared whether anyone survived them or not. He set the brace down on the bench beside him, the faded yellow stripe catching the low light, and flexed his wrist once, testing it, finding nothing wrong. Vadel found him there a while later, carrying 2 trays from the mess hall, and sat down without asking, the way Threx had once done to him. You're not wearing it anymore, Vadel said. Didn't need it. They ate in silence for a while, the kind of silence that didn't need filling, stars sliding past the viewport in the same slow, indifferent arc they always did. Threx thinks it was never a ladder, Vadel said eventually. Julian glanced at the brace on the bench between them, faded stripe, worn fabric, no longer wrapped around anything. He didn't answer. At the next table over, out of the corner of his hearing, one of the newer cadets was explaining to a friend, with total confidence and roughly 40% accuracy, exactly how a human was supposed to survive a bear. Julian let it go uncorrected. Some things were better learned wrong first.